Hi, listener. This is From Ideology to Unity, a spiritual journey where we let go of ego and ideological doctrine in favor of meaning, purpose, and unity as a whole. Right. So I am, doing another reading of Quantum Theory and Free Will: How Mental Intentions Translate Our Bodily Actions by Henry P. Stapp. And okay, then let's pick up where we were before. So this chapter is chapter 7, Backward in Time Causation. Orthodox quantum mechanics is based on the idea that a physically described state of the universe exists in an instant of time over all of three-dimensional space and advances event by event into an indeterminate future, leaving behind a fixed and settled sequence of past states. Yeah, I would say that's kind of flawed. Because time is an illusion, but yeah. Certain phenomena associated with this chain of events appear to involve backward in time causation, but they are accommodated without introducing any actual backward in time action. This is important for a valid understanding of nature, to understand how orthodox quantum mechanics accommodates seeming backward in time actions. Delayed choice experiments. John Archibald Wheeler described an experiment that seemed to show that an experimenter's free choice about which experiment he or she performs at one time can affect what happened at an earlier time. The essential point can be illustrated by following the idealized version. Suppose you have a supersensitive vision and you can detect individual photons falling upon your retina. Imagine that you are looking through one eye at a screen with two small holes, through which light of visible frequency is moving in your direction. Quantum mechanics says that if you focus your vision on the screen and the light is sufficiently weak and your vision is sufficiently sensitive, you will see the individual photons passing essentially one at a time through either one hole or the other. But if you choose to focus instead on a location far behind the screen, then the photons will instead come one at a time, but will build up a complex interference pattern that depends on the distance between the two holes, apparently showing that the light associated with each individual photon has, in some sense, passed through both holes. Thus, what happens earlier at the screen, namely the individual photons passing through both holes, or passing through just one hole, seems to depend on your later choice of how to focus your eye. So, you may well find connections here between this and previous things we've been talking about. But anyway, I will continue. So we affect the reality. Obviously, that's something I've talked about quite a bit in these readings. Essentially, the same experiment can be performed with devices that act so fast that the choice between two alternative possible focal lengths can then be made by a random number generator after the photon has passed through the screen. Thus, it would appear that, in some sense, the photon either passes exclusively through one slit or the other, but not both, or alternatively, through both together, depending on which line of observation is chosen after the photon has passed through the hole or holes. So what it suggests is, if observation is king here, right? If observation is determining reality, if the state, your mental state determines reality, like you could go into the law of attraction here, but for example, if the external state is a reflection of the internal state, right? That means that the observation from a mind observing is the determining factor, right? And that the sequence of events that we consider to be time is, well, largely an illusion or construct deriving in part from the mind, right? Or other minds, the minds as a whole, right? So why would what has happened in the past be immune from this? Things, non-mentated things, if that's even the word, are shaped by the mentation. What I mean is, like, the mind will shape like what happens, and if there's occurrences which aren't really it's what the mind observes, and that observation is what determines what happens, and it works around the observation. Reality changes to match the observation to some extent, right? And it's a bit like this idea of, if a tree falls and no one hears it, does it fall? But it's one step further from that. It's more like, based on the perception or the mental state of you, whether a tree falls or whatever happens, whether it flies in the air or spontaneously builds a house or whatever the fuck, it all is just like, you determine that in a sense, or at least the mind does. Minds do that, and it's like the co-creation among all the minds. But this isn't just regarding things in space, this is regarding things in time, and since time is all literally one moment anyway, and kind of an illusion, things in the future and in the past are changed by observation in the present. And that present as different, and the new present, when you're further ahead, let's say, will potentially change things as well. Things that might have already been changed. You might have determined your future from your past, but then change what you determine later on, because it's all a moment, right? Hopefully that's coherent. So, this kind of experiment is called a delayed choice experiment, and various refinements of it have been designed and successfully carried out by Scully and colleagues. The observed phenomena certainly confirm to the just described predictions of quantum theory, but the causal implications need further discussion. The Bohmian approach to explaining causal implications. For example, one proposed way to understand quantum mechanics was advanced in the early days of quantum mechanics by physicist Louis de Broglie, whatever. It was then pretty much abandoned due to criticisms by Pauli, but resurrected and developed by David Bohm in the 1950s. This way of understanding the success of quantum mechanics asserts that there really is a classical type world of tiny particles, but also a wave-like quantum state of the universe that evolves always in accordance with the Schrödinger equation and never collapses in association with an increase in our knowledge, as specified by both the Copenhagen and orthodox versions of quantum mechanics. In Bohm's no-collapse quantum mechanics, collapse quantum mechanics, the function of the wave is to guide the particles, which are assumed to be the aspects of nature that control our conscious experiences. In this Bohmian model of reality, the changes made in the focusing of your eyes influence the evolution of the quantum wave within your eyeballs. And this change in the wave, which travels through both holes, influences the trajectory of the photon, particle of light, which travels through only one hole, when it lies inside your eye, which is focused in one way or the other. This theory correctly accounts for the delayed choice phenomenon without invoking, in our two-slit experiment, any notion of backward time or causation. The difference in what is observed is due to the classical classically understandable causal effect of the trajectory of the photon on the way the eye is focused, or in other versions of the experiment, on the details of the experiment determined at the last moment by an independent number generator, RNG. This Bohmian, I would add that this Bohmian approach, it's almost like the Schrodinger equation is God, and I don't mean in a pantheistic sense, this is in a completely theistic sense, and it's just determining everything in a deterministic way like that. And yeah, it doesn't really add up to me. But anyway, this Bohmian approach does account for physical properties considered self-determining physical properties. But the classical demand that these particles interact essentially by contact interactions in ordinary 3D space is grossly violated by the two-observer FDL experiment. In that experiment, which experimenter in the spatial region decides to perform can have a big effect on which outcome appears at essentially the same instant in a very far away laboratory. And as in classical physics, the theory says nothing about our minds. If science is property about growing our growing knowledge, then the theory is fundamentally incomplete, for it offers no rational account of how the physical description that it provides is tied to our evolving mentally described knowledge, and how, if at all, our mental intentions influence the activities of our brains, and hence bodies. Bohm himself addressed this problem and was forced to replace his original simple non-local theory by a very complex one in which the mystery of the mind is transferred to a mystery about an infinite tower observing systems, each observing what is physically happening in the level just below. The simplicity and attractiveness of his original quasi-classical quantum theory was lost when he tried to incorporate our human experiences. But incorporating our causally effective mental intentions is exactly what realistically construed orthodox quantum mechanics achieves. It offers a rationally coherent, mathematically formulated description of reality that includes an account of how our mental intentions influence our physical behavior in a way that is concordant with all the empirical evidence, instead of defaming us by claiming our most important human quality, the capacity of our mental intentions to influence our bodily actions, is an illusion or a delusion. The price to pay for this increase in rational understanding is a failure of Einstein's classical physics-based intuition that the information cannot travel faster than light. But in quantum mechanics, one has, instead the property that no signal, send a chosen message, can be sent faster than light. This weaker property of quantum mechanics suffices to maintain in the quantum world the essential empirical requirements of the theory of relativity. Wait. Okay, I'm going to look over that again because so in quantum mechanics, one has instead the property that no signal can be sent faster than light. But why? Okay, great. There's still the weaker property that can be held on to, but why even hold on to that? Why don't we just go with the thing that intuition can travel faster than the light and just accept that it can? And Einstein was wrong. Like, okay, maybe they're about to address that. Anyway, this chapter is, wait, how long is this chapter? Oh yeah, we've got some seriously short chapters here, but it's all right. Chapter 8, actual past and historical past. The evolving history of the universe is normally regarded as being divided into three parts: past, present, and future. The present instant now separates the past that has already happened from the future that has not yet happened. One idea of the nature of things is described by the phrase closed past, open future. It indicates that the past is already fixed and settled, whereas the future is not yet determined. Another idea is the block universe, in which every event in the entire history of the universe is already predetermined, is already fated to be exactly what it was or will eventually turn out to be. Now, I would, of course, I would go with the idea that the past and future are the present, and it's all malleable in a sense. Deterministic classical mechanics is usually regarded as defining a block universe. Einstein considered the universe to be a block universe, and his theory of special relativity dealt with many ways in which one can assign four coordinates, y, x, y, z, t, to the base time points of this block universe in which the entire predetermined course of history of the universe is laid out. There is no real becoming. Orthodox quantum mechanics, on the other hand, is based on a forward-in-time process consisting of a well-ordered sequence of psychophysical events that are associated with a well-ordered sequence of instants now, each of which is a smooth 3D surface in the 4D spacetime. I mean, I do think that's definitely an improvement, although when it comes to multi-dimensionality, I think it goes beyond 4 dimensions, it goes beyond 5, and it's pretty much infinite dimensions. But, you know, it's a pretty good theory working here, I think, compared to the flaws of the other ones, like the Bohmian Mechanics, for example. Associate each surface is later at some point, but earlier at no point from its immediate predecessor, as already discussed in chapter 3. Associated with each present instant now, labeled by a certain symbol, there is a state density matrix of the universe that defines via the Born rule the probabilities of the various alternative possible outcomes of the probing action question posed by the observer associated with the collapse event located on that present instant. The state of the universe can be called the actual past of the instant. It is the immediate past that partially controls, in conjunction with the observer's probing question, the collapse occurring on the instant. Now, I am skipping out a Greek symbol that keeps coming up. So it says like labeled by a certain Greek symbol, and then it's like density matrix of the universe, certain Greek symbol. And then at the end, you know, a number of times it mentions it, and it's like the collapse occurring on the instant of that Greek symbol. I don't know what that symbol is, so I'm just like, for him, I'm just going to clarify that. I'm just going to like not even read it out. I'm going to read it out as if it's not there. And if it sounds odd, that'll just be how it is, because I'm not going to be doing, I don't know Greek symbols. I'm not a mathematician. I'm not a physicist, really. So I'm just dealing with it on a conceptual level. And I think that will suffice. So this collapse event, according to the orthodox collapse interpretation, changes the immediate future potentialities by eliminating from them all future effects that stem from those parts of the prior quantum state that were eliminated by the collapse that occurred at the instant. I'll say instant X, shall we? So, tell you what, I'll read it out again just to make it clear, because I don't know if you took it in. And I'll say X instead of that Greek symbol. Associated with each present now, labeled by X, there was a state density matrix of the universe, Y brackets, X, close brackets, that defines via the Born rule the probabilities of the various alternative possible outcomes of the probing action question, posed by the observer associated with the collapse event located on that present X. The state of the universe, Y, open bracket, X, close brackets, can be called the actual past of the instant X. It is the immediate past that partially controls, in conjunction with the observer's probing question, the collapse occurring in the instant X. So All right, so, okay. The state of the universe can be called the actual past, the immediate past that partly controls the collapse, there's a state that's the present, defined by the Born rule. There's a state defines via the Born rule probabilities of the various alternative future outcomes. So there's, with process one, there's there's a bunch of different process two possibilities, right? They think of them like timelines. And process one picks which the observer sees play out in their reality, right? And so the collapse is basically all those process two outcomes being filtered out so that only the chosen one, so to speak, is the one that comes, or the one that reflects the frequency, let's say, of the emotions and the mental state of the observer. And those are the ones that is the one that they experience, right? Now, the idea it seems to be talking about here is that the future can, this moment when this happens, as it was established in the last chapter, the past can be shaped by that, right? And also the future can be shaped by that, because if you change which timeline is going on, will affect which timeline is picked, basically, will affect, well, there's things down the line that happen, right, on that process two, right? But which process two is picked will determine, well, what those future events are. So what we can establish, even with this, what we're saying here is that the past and the future are determined by the present moment, by the collapse, by the process one, which collapses processes two into one outcome, which plays out one, let's say, timeline. It doesn't say timeline in this, but it's talking about future and past and all this stuff. I see that as timelines playing out and being chosen, but that's just how my interpretation of it. Now, there seems to be a distinction between actual past and historical past. It hasn't really got to that detail yet, but the state of the universe, or the density matrix, right, that defines via the Born rule the probabilities of alternative outcomes of the probing question that causes the collapse, right? That state, that particular state can be called the actual past of instant X. So there's instant X, and it has an actual past, which is like the immediate past prior to it. And this immediate past partially controls, in conjunction with the observer's probing question, the collapse occurring in that moment. Why? Because while, you see, we might perceive in the moment, these things in the past fundamentally shape what the observer perceives to be their reality in the moment, right? And it determines your sense of the immediate past does shape your sense of your situation, I guess. And that is a context, perhaps, for how you feel, your state, and what is attracted into your reality, or how the collapse plays out, or what you choose, or basically process one picking, in inverted commas, one of the process two outcomes. Okay, so I think that's what it's saying, or at least my take on what it's saying. Now, This collapse event has, according to the orthodox collapse interpretation, changed the immediate future potentialities by eliminating from them all causal effects that stem from those parts of the prior quantum state that were eliminated by the collapse that occurred at the instant x. The new set of immediate future potentialities is, because of this collapse that occurred at instant x, different from what it had previously been. Okay, so there was a future, and the future that was going to play out changed based on which timeline was picked that it's on, essentially, right? But consider the past is also malleable, right? So if you pick a different timeline, you pick different events that have happened. And you might not know the past events that are going to be different in this new timeline that you're picking. That is if you know you're picking, right? Because you might not know you're picking. You might not, you just might be your mental state changes subconsciously. And there's a collapse, you switch which reality you're perceiving, you don't notice, but certain things are different, even your past. You don't even notice. Hardly conceivable, is it not? There you go. Future and past. So it's actual past and historical past. All right. The new set of immediate future potentialities is, because of this collapse that occurred at the instant x, different from what it had previously been. The past of the future has changed, so it's like there's meta time and meta time, right? In the meta sense of the observer, there's a new future, right? And even a new past. Or another way of saying is like there's the past and the new past. Okay, so what does it say here? Consequently, the actual past, inverted commas, does not provide the pertinent to the future representation of the past. The representation of the past is pertinent to the future. The representation of the past that is pertinent to the future is the one that smoothly evolves according to the continuous laws of motion, the Schrödinger-like equation, into the quantum state that has just been created. This causally pertinent state of the past is called the effective past. So, like the past we're working with, that process 2, that is currently the one you're in, the current reality that fits, that matches your frequency, basically. It is specified by evolving the newly created state backwards in time by means of the inverse of the pertinent Schrödinger-like equation. Thus, the actual past is the state of the universe that existed just prior to the present instant now, whereas the effective past is the part of the past state that smoothly evolves into the immediate future, and therefore pertains to the potentialities associated with the next instant. Between the two events, the two instants, the state evolves via process 2. All right. So the actual past is, what was the past? The actual past was your effective past until your change of frequency made it so that you're in a different timeline, and thus that your effective past is different now. Here's the thing, is it independent from the observer? Perhaps not. So it's based on each observer. So different observers have different pasts, which explains why there's different timelines, because there's so many different people observing, right? And since frequency varies, at a certain point, if frequencies diverge enough, right, and experiences diverge, you start getting experiences that are just completely too different to even compare. So even though there's co-creation, at a certain point, they stop being really, they're too different to really compare them. If you can't really call it co-creation in the same sense. Whereas other people, sometimes diverging timelines can converge into a single one. And what happens when you get that is you get the Mandela effect. That's what you get. You get people with different memories of different positions of the pyramids or whatever, or different memories of which person died, or certain movies, what words we use. That's what you get. And that's why, because different people are in different, because through process one, there was a convergence of process one, a convergence of frequencies and the states which determined which process two people were experiencing, they became convergences. And I would suggest that it's linked to the awakening, I suppose. So it actually merged a whole different bunch of parallel Earths together, in a sense. And that's why there's different experiences, and they were more different in the past, but the awakening means that they unify into one at a future point in time. After this awakening is complete, they're united. Well, the ones that can unite with the ones that can awaken anyway, which means that, yeah, I mean, that seems to make sense to me. Anyway, the effective past contains, in particular, the records of those parts of the past that have survived the recent collapse and are thus relevant to the current future. Records, as in Akashic records, maybe? These are, after all, memories, right? Whether they're remembered or not, they're still there on some level. Though memories on a soul level, not necessarily on a biological level. That's what I would say anyway. Since the effective past contains these surviving records, it is the part of the actual past that we can in principle recall, or at least on a biological level. The rest of the actual past is eradicated by the collapse and is forever non-recoverable, unless you access the Akashic records, in which case you can access all the memories ever. Okay, there's different aspects of it, right? There's the Earth Akashic records. If you actually access that, you can access the memories of everyone ever on the Earth and who will be on the Earth and all of that. I think if you get access to the universal Akashic records, like you can find out anything basically. Honestly, there's people who know a lot more about the Akashic records than me. It's just that this seems to be linked, in my opinion. Anyway. These important aspects of quantum mechanics are succinctly captured by an assertion made in the recent book, The Grand Design by Stephen Hawking and Leonard Mlodinow. We create history by our observations. History does not create us. We, by our free, asserted to be uncoerced by matter, choices of our probing questions, influence the evolving form of the material universe by means of the FTL effects of these choices on a sequence of global, non-local collapse events. Now that's pretty solid, that. I mean, like, powerful, like, has big implications. Right. The rules of relativistic quantum field theory Ensure, however, that these instantaneous actions can never be used to send a sender-controlled message faster than the speed of light to an actual receiving intelligence. As in, you can't, so it's saying that you can't just send messages fast speed of light. I mean, you can though, like channeling does that. So that's wrong. Right. Hence, Einstein's demand of a no faster than light transfer of information is in fact satisfied in orthodox quantum mechanics insofar as this information is sender-controlled information and becomes known to a receiving observer, or at least with regard to evidence that this author has available anyway. We will see in due course evidence coming out that proves that, yeah, that precisely that sender-controlled messages faster than light to actually receiving intelligences actually occur. Yeah, that's my view. So this, insofar as one accepts that we live in a real quantum, not effectively classical universe, described by orthodox quantum mechanics, in which our choices of probing questions are not coerced by material processes, care must be taken to make distinctions that have no counterpart in classical mechanics. For example, whether the effect is on the consciousness of an actual person or upon quantum potentialities, for a collection of 4 alternative possibilities, at most one of which can actually happen. Well, I don't see why it would just be 1 on potentiality, but yeah. I don't see why it would just be 4 potentialities, but yeah. To see how these considerations play out, let us consider the Wheeler delayed choice experiment. At the moment that the pulse of light is passing through the holes, the quantum wave that represents the light is divided between the 2 holes. If at a later time the observer sees the photon coming through the left-hand hole, then according to the rules of quantum mechanics, a global collapse will occur. The parts of the quantum state incompatible with that experience will be obliterated. The new state, representing the potentialities for future experiences of all observers, will be the continuation into the future of the surviving part of the prior state. Now, I would ask you to consider what happens if one observer observes it going through one of the holes, and another observes it going through the other. Whether or not that's actually what's going on, it's not the point. That's what they perceive subjectively. That's what their mental state tells them when they look, right? Now, what would happen, surely, would be, well, one of them would be picking by process one outcome, and one would pick another. And they would diverge onto different timelines. But there is also the issue of co-creation, isn't there? Now, I don't know exactly how this works, but there's a certain extent to which people can be in the same process to a universe, even if they're perceiving things different. Is it based on whether or not there's a global collapse or something else going on? You know, I don't have the answer to that. And it is a potential route of discovery, I suppose. Like how that actually works. Why is it that, what determines whether someone is in the same timeline or process 2 sequence or whatever as another person, and where's the threshold at which they actually diverge into a new one, a separate one, and what determines whether they rejoin? You know, I think that when it comes to, if the issue about probing questions affecting reality tells us anything, it's that questions are more important than answers. The new state representing the potentialities for the future experiences of all observers, will be the continuation into the future of the surviving part of the prior state. The continuation of the new state backwards in time using the Schrödinger equation in reverse is the effective past. The existing evolving state is, as Hawking and Molodinow state, created by our observations together with nature's responding actions. All future experiences of all observers will be concordant with the empirical fact that the photon was seen by some observers to pass through, say, the left hole. By some observer to pass through the left hole. So this is saying that one observer or some observers can affect what other people experience without those people knowing. I'm not going to write that off, but something feels off about that, or at least that it's not the whole picture. The evolving situation during... Wait, I don't actually... Yeah. The evolving situation during the time that the pulse of light was passing through the screen was that the wave was passing through both holes. That's a superposition, right? Oh, okay. So people can be in the same reality insofar as there's superposition, insofar as there's not observation. Observation is linked to it fundamentally. These sort of what they call something effect, Mandela effect stuff. But I admit I don't have the answers to everything naturally, right? Okay, the evolving situation during the time that the pulse of light was passing through the screen was that the wave was passing through both holes. That fact is fixed and settled. It is never revoked. But if the observer poses the question, do I see the light coming through the left-hand hole? And nature's response is yes. Then the quantum state collapses to the part compatible with the observer's experience. This state, extended backwards in time via the Schrödinger equation acting in reverse, we have the light wave passing through the left-hand hole, and the effect of this observation will be incorporated into all future experiences of all observers. All of this is logically captured and mathematically represented by von Neumann's conception of the nature of things. This orthodox way of understanding the apparent backwards in time effects uses only strictly forward in time evolution of the quantum state. It achieves this explanation by the apparent retro-causation by using the orthodox forward in time dynamics. Some of these rules lead to the continual generation of smears of alternative classically conceivable but mutually incompatible possible worlds. Other orthodox rules govern the collapses of this evolving quantum state. These collapses systematically trim away the branches of this growing quantum state that become irrelevant to the future. These branches have become irrelevant because they led to possibilities that were probed by observing actors' agents and were eliminated by nature's choice of reply. Okay, this kind of clarifies a bit, right? So naturally, every time so so each collapse is a global event, right? Instantly altering quantum state at a spooky action at a distance, sort of in that way. Okay. Some of these rules lead to a continual generation of smears of alternative classically conceivable and mutually incompatible possible worlds. Why is that? Why do you get those smears? Because what is a superposition? No, as in like, so these smears are possibilities, but what is it for there to be all these possibilities? Why is there a spreading out of, a branching out of different possibilities? Is it the absence of observation? Maybe that there are more possibilities than observers can keep track of. Doesn't seem right. Okay, so for whatever reason, there's a growing set of possibilities, right? It's not like global collapses are happening all the time. Well, maybe they are, but like, I almost feel like I should know this, but So to clarify, each dot, so there's a graph, right? A smear is a whole set of different dots, let's say, representing different possibilities. But each possibility is actually more like, that dot is actually one moment of a timeline, right? And these going forward in time, and if you just take one instant, you just got a whole bunch of dots across the smear, right? Now, every time there's this probing thing done, probing questions, so to speak, every time the observation, every time there's one of these global collapses, anything that doesn't fit the parameters of what's chosen, so to speak, will be pruned out. But just because it's pruned out, it doesn't mean it's pruned out across from the perspective of every single being in the universe, because there are cases when there's enough of a distinction between what one coagulation or grouping of souls observe and another, such that there's a collapse that collapses in one direction and a collapse that collapses in another. And what you get then is you no longer have, even though it's global for the clustering, not all the observers in the whole multiverse, because it's an infinite set of possibilities. Everything, it's entirely infinite and fractal, which means that these are those timelines, right? These timelines aren't the possibilities, right? The timelines aren't the possibilities. The coagulations of possibilities, right? So you get a bunch of different possibilities smeared, right? And a bunch of people are all picking the same thing, right? In their observed experience. Or nature's picking form, whatever, because we are one with nature, source, and so forth. So it's the same thing pretty much. So through process one, a bunch of people, they're picking a certain reality, right? Now imagine this is like a tube. Like you can't really, if you're not seeing it, it wouldn't really matter. So there's two dots, right? But they're really just 2D representations of, think of it like a tube or string or whatever, right? It basically is a timeline, right? So one coagulation, a whole bunch of people pick process one timeline. Other people, they pick something else. And what you get from these two things is timelines, two timelines, right? But is it as simple as that even? Maybe it's more going on than that, because there's a whole set of process one decisions, so let's say choices about what is in the reality. And the timelines are created from, emergently perhaps, from the interactions of, so all the souls let's say 1 million souls, right? Whatever. There's a whole bunch of souls. They pick for a whole bunch of things. They pick through process one which reality they're in, right? And then based on that, reality filters through a consistent reality based on that co-creation of choices. Where it's too different for some groups, some of them relative to others, you get 2 timelines, right? So it's not a reality for each choice. It's a reality for a whole bunch of choices which coagulate into one consistently perceived reality, right? That's a timeline, perhaps. That's where timelines come from. And these can be seen as, well, like a timeline, a line, right? 2 separate lines, right? But they can merge when the observations that are made by people become similar enough that they come together. But it doesn't mean they come completely consistent enough to be an overall consistent reality, which means that the Mandela effect can still happen. But are you aware of evolution? I imagine you are. But there's this concept in natural selection where some species don't, what was it? So some species, a species will diverge enough from, or some of the animals in the species might diverge enough that they become different enough to be their own species. Maybe there's some of the species on an island that island become separated. Enough time passes, they become completely different species, right? And so there's a sort of evolutionary process of perception, of reality, of process 1, process 2, of attraction, whatever you put it, through manifestation and creating of reality. The way it works is there's an evolution of consciousness, of many divergent and convergent and interactive in different ways. I suppose you could say realities or timelines or something. And on a completely zoomed out level, each timeline might be a string, but on a completely zoomed in level, it's a whole coagulation of different people's experiences. And so when I said a string, I meant like string theory. So maybe each timeline of a density on the octave above just is a string in string theory, which creates an overall frequency or tone from which frequencies are made on that octave, and forever up and forever down, and multi-dimensionality. Hopefully I'm coherent at this point, but I don't know, maybe I was picking up on something, because I was getting, I wasn't clear on certain things, and then the answers just came to me. But I didn't hear a voice or anything. It's interesting. I understood. I acquired understanding in an abstract sense, but in a non-linguistical sense. But I did speak it out, didn't I? You know, I am wondering, when I do these solo casts, am I actually channeling? I've wondered that already recently, and I'm just like, but someone mentioned it, I interviewed, and like they said I'm a clear channel, and I was like, did they say that through observation of my solo casting? Because like when I just flow like this, I don't always know what I'm going to say, right? It's just kind of like I see this clarity, and I'm like, this explains this thing I'm wondering. Anyway. Okay, where was I? Okay. All this is logically captured and mathematically represented by von Neumann's conception of the nature of things. The orthodox way of understanding the apparent backwards in time effects uses only strictly forward in time evolution of the quantum state. It achieves an explanation of apparently retrocausation using the orthodox forward in time dynamics. Okay, skip forward a bit. Yeah, I kind of a bit further ahead than that. Each such nature-produced collapse, although precipitated by the probing action of some localized observer, is a globalized event. It instantly alters all aspects of the quantum state that pertain to observations about to occur in faraway regions. This instantaneous effect, spooky action at a distance, is incompatible with the no faster than light transfer conditions asserted by Einstein's theory of relativity. By proving that these spooky actions at a distance are unavoidable consequences of a few well-verified predictions of quantum mechanics pertaining exclusively to macroscopic phenomena without introducing any conditions pertaining to microstructure, the theory rules out the possibility that the world of macroscopic phenomena can be rationally understood as being built out of classically conceived matter. Materialism is ruled out. Boom. Take that, Einstein. Yeah, that's a bit unfair to him. Anyway. The important implication of this analysis is that it rules out a notion prevalent among philosophers and scientists interested in the mind-matter connection, that quantum effects pertain only to microscopic processes, and that apart from elements of quantum randomness, the quantum character of reality somehow magically disappears at the level of macroscopic physical processes. There is no science-based justification to believe that behavior of the brain or a conscious person can be understood in terms of the concepts of classical physics, the promise in what Sir Karl Popper called promissory materialism conflicts with contemporary basic science. And so does materialism. There's no way around it. It's just mainstream science, like mainstream. Like normally, I'm in this weak position, say, or we might be people who are, let's say, believe in like New Age stuff. Like they'll be in a weak position where, like, if you're not mainstream in something, usually it's kind of like, you normally, if you're like New Age, like you're in this non-mainstream position where only a few scientists will even like back up your position in any way, right? But this is like mainstream, like absolutely really clear cut like science here, and it's just like based on that materialism is ruled out. This is huge, and it's interesting that all this time these implications, it's all being ignored, sidelined, or I don't think you can put it down to just somehow they just didn't figure it out. Somehow, it's not even that hard to understand, really. But somehow they didn't figure it out. No. They weren't willing to accept the conclusion because of materialist bias. They unscientifically, the majority of them, for decades, ever since the founders, who kind of knew the implications but knew they couldn't really spell it out, they're playing this little pretend dance where they're like, let's just pretend that materialism has actually got some foundation to it, right? And the cabal is probably the reason, right? That's probably the real reason behind this bias, or behind the gatekeeping of the scientific community and stuff like that. But it is complete bullshit. Like, I mean, like, it's pretty clear cut that there's no basis for materialism. ever since the early 20th century, if you actually look at quantum mechanics. Like Niels Bohr's pretty much proved it, really. But like, no, we must have this clear-cut classical mechanically described reality. Because why? Why? Because that's more convenient to the powers that be. We have priests telling us what is reality. And anyone who doesn't follow the precepts of these priests are sidelined, ridiculed, and so forth. Just like it has been in organized religion for so long. Now, there's a reason why the concept of the church, what was that? It's this political concept called the church. There's this guy who's kind of libertarian. He came up with this idea. Oh, what's his name? Oh man, I can't remember it. Anyway, you probably might know what I'm talking about, but there's this concept called the church. Now, what this idea is that in an automatic way, so it doesn't relate to any conspiracy theories. It doesn't talk about conspiracy theories, which is kind of a thought, something that's missing. But in any case, this idea that essentially all these different institutions effectively work as a religion. But if we look at science and this aspect of it, if we look at how the determination of what is true and what is acceptable to believe in as truth, then the way the belief system works, the way information is catered, or what's the word, not catered, pruned and influenced, and what people believe is influenced. If you look at what happened with, let's say, Catholicism, is it really different? If you think about it, what we could call the mainstream scientific community, in many respects, it's not that obviously there's plenty of evidence, there's plenty of good science there, but in a lot of respects, the role it plays is pretty much just like the church. It's just a church. And let's be heretics. Yeah? Let's overthrow the whole church. Fuck the church. I like that. I like being like this. Sorry. I like that sort of, yeah, you know. It feels good to say. Forgive me for it, right? All right. So we've got another chapter here. Chapter 9, the Libet free will experiments. This should be interesting. According to 19th century classical physics, reality is described in purely physical terms and is deterministic. The world is described in terms of mathematical properties attached to space-time points, and the future is completely determined by the past, by virtue of mathematical conditions on these properties. This formerly believed feature of nature is called the causal closure of the physical. So, whereas, of course, the moment, which is the present moment throughout all time, which is an illusion anyway, can affect the future and the past. We've already established that. So, in stark contrast, the purely physical aspects of the quantum laws determine from the physically described aspects of the past only a statistical mixture of future potential physical worlds. Thus, the purely mechanical aspects of the mechanical aspects of the quantum mechanical laws of motion have a causal gap. They do not determine from the physically described aspect of the past the physically described aspects of the future, but only a quantum statistical mixture of such aspects. And what bridges that gap? None of them really succeed in doing that. in my opinion, I might be wrong, other than where process 1 and process 2 is talked about. What that does is say, okay, there's a process 1, nature is picking one of the results, and so to speak, and we know what realistically interpreted orthodox quantum mechanics says. That is process 1, their mental state affecting reality, determines which is experienced through the Born rule and smear effect, where there's a superposition collapse into one of those outcomes based on the observation. Right. Okay. So something else or something more must enter into the causal structure in order to determine the nature of reality under consideration at this specified point in time. This lack of determinateness inherent in quantum mechanics at this stage of determining the nature of reality is not resolved simply by specifying the value of some quantum element of chance. So it's not a dice being rolled in a quantum sense. I mean, it's consciousness determining reality. That's what I think anyway. According to the basic precepts of standard Copenhagen von Neumann quantum mechanics, a reduction of the uncertainty represented by this quantum statistical mixture requires that a particular probing action specified by yes, no question be chosen by an observer. Furthermore, an answer yes or no is required to be chosen and reified, brackets, made concrete or actualized, close brackets, by nature. As a result, two key questions arise. 1. What determines which yes-no question the observer will choose? And what determines nature's answer, yes or no? The answer to the second question is that the answer in the form of the binary yes or no is determined by the infamous quantum element of chance. But what determines which yes-no question the observer will choose? Now, I would add that I don't think it's by chance what nature chooses. You could put down nature to all that is, or infinite source, and say the observer is just like one soul, which is technically source, but a splinter of it, right? Or to put it in terms of the Course of Miracles, nature, so to speak, is like the Father, or we are the Son, in a sense. So I fundamentally think, through pantheism or panpsychism, that since all is one, that technically speaking, we are the same essence, or as the Father, or the same essence as all that is, or infinite source, right? A soul is, spirit is the essence, right? And soul, God, essence, we are God, or at least we are God essence, but we are not the whole of it, except we kind of are because we're all one. We are a splinter of it, yet still connected to all that is. And so in that sense, the observer and nature are effectively one, but we experience reality not as all that is, as infinite source. We experience as a soul, right? So it seems like a contradiction between two contradictory positions, all right? But we don't live in a dualistic universe. We live in a unified reality, right? And that's panpsychism, right? Pantheism. So, and the law of one applies. So, in a sense, my answer to this conundrum, or at least what I'd add here is that what determines which yes, no, what question the observer will choose, what determines nature's answer, yes or no. Fundamentally, these two choices are one, right? And that's my take. We'll see what they say, and I'm probably got more to say on it based on that. So the answer to the second question is that the answer in the form of the binary yes/no is determined by the infamous quantum element of chance. But what's okay, we've got that. Next page. In actual scientific practice, the answer to this question is determined by the observer's personal choice of what to attend to. This choice is definitely not determined by the quantum physical laws, and it is, in that specific sense, a free choice. This choice is thus naturally determined within the Copenhagen-VN framework by the observer's mental aspect, and hence from values embedded in the observer's mental aspect, his ego. Well, I say the ego, I'm sure the ego has a role in it, but I would say from the soul, because we are the observer, not just a quantum phenomena, but of the ego itself, which in a sense is, just as much a construction as the simulated reality around us anyway, because we create our own reality. But sure, the observer's mental aspect, that's the free choice, the free will. Though, something I would add is that the extent to which free will is exerted or utilized will depend on the degree of consciousness of the soul or entity, whatever in question. And frequency, in a sense, could represent that extent. If you consider that it's infinite, there's no real limit to that. It's more relative to the densities in each octave, or dimensions in each octave, or whatever. I'm aware that if someone's just like listening to this episode without listening to any of the stuff, and they don't know about the law of one, and they don't know about quantum mechanics, this would be confusing as fuck. But if you're in that situation, I would recommend listening to prior episodes. You might get more out of it that way, just saying. These quantum mechanical precepts can be illustrated by showing how they work in practice in the infamous free will experiments performed by Benjamin Libet and his associates, Libet, 1985. Introduction to Libet. We all feel that certain of our conscious thoughts can, and often do, cause our voluntary bodily actions to occur. Our lives, our institutions, and our moral philosophers are largely based on the intuitive sense of how the world works. Oh, moral philosophies, not philosophers, but yeah. In fact, the entire notion of cause probably originates in that deep-seated feeling or intuition. An evidence-based argument against this basic intuition, that our thoughts can influence our bodily actions, stems from an experiment performed by Benjamin Libet and his associates, 1985 and 2003. In this experiment, a human subject is instructed to perform voluntarily during a certain time interval a simple physical action such as raising a finger. Libet found that a measurable brain precursor, the readiness potential, or the conscious choice, is promptly performed. Libet found that a measurable brain precursor, the readiness potential of the conscious choice to promptly perform an action, occurs in the brain about 1/3 of a second prior to the occurrence of the psychologically experienced act of willing that action to promptly occur. This empirical result appears, on the face of it, to show that the conscious act of willing must be a consequence of the associated brain activity, not a cause of it. 4. According to the normal idea of cause, a free choice cannot cause a prior happening to occur. But if you consider the time, the aspects in which quantum mechanics transcend time, going forward and back, and there's evidence in certain experiments that we've covered that are actually show that, then that's not the implication at all. That's not what it means. And that's only been interpreted that way because of, well, the mainstream paradigm just ignoring of science. It's just ignoring certain aspects or implications of orthodox quantum mechanics due to bias. So there you go. This example is just one instance of a general feature of the mind-brain phenomena, namely that the fact that a conscious experience of choosing often seems to occur after a lot of preparatory work has already been done by the brain. This fact, combined with the classical mechanics precept of the causal closure of the physical, leads possibly to the conclusion that the felt causal potency of our conscious choices is an illusion. Well, might do. I don't think so, for reasons I've given. Libet in a quantum mechanical framework. However, an examination of this Libet experiment, viewed from the perspective of the quantum framework developed in the mid-1920s by the founders of quantum mechanics, the founders, that is, to deal with the observed physical phenomena and cast into logically, mathematically rigorous form already in 1932 by John von Neumann, the guy who came out with process 1 and process 2, by which reality is determined by consciousness, shows that these shows these Libet results to be in good accord with both, 1, the quantum postulated freedom of those human choices from physical coercion, and 2, the capacity of those value-based intentional mental choices to influence the chooser's future bodily actions in the intended manner. Any dynamical theory, to be relevant to our experienced lives, must link the dynamics to our streams of consciousness experiences. Quantum theory is built squarely upon the demand that this condition be met. It is a psychophysical dynamical theory that has causal connections between human brains and minds built intrinsically into it, in a way that allows our conscious choices to be both free of physical coercion, yet causally potent in the physically described world. Now, I would add that the idea of, well, the ego being an illusion is kind of perhaps where that time lag comes from. That's in the brain, but the immediate non-biological perception we can have of reality just by being in the moment, experiencing by our soul, that's instant. That's absolutely instant. So the illusion, the construct, is the ego experience. And that's something that's not being mentioned in this book. Maybe it's more that the ego's experience of things is limited and there are choices made before the ego, insofar as it experiences anything, quote, experiences reality. Because it's just like a set of programs we experience through a set of filters. And that process kind of perceives things at the end of that sequence. But what's at the beginning of that sequence? Probably the soul. It's that all the muck, all the gunk, all those programs that we've created, the ego basically, is what prevents us from seeing our own choices, in a sense. Or at least our own choices until a certain time lag has happened. The awakening is reducing that time lag, perhaps. Maybe, or just making it so that we get the instant access to our conscious choices, or we're raising awareness of our own choices, or something like that. In spite of the obviously extreme, pertinent 20th century revision of relevant physical properties, contemporary neuroscience and philosophy of mind largely continues to base their quest to understand human consciousness on the inadequate 19th century classical mechanical conceptualization of reality, which, contrary to standard quantum mechanics, leaves our consciousness completely out of the causal dynamics. Well, yeah. The limit causal anomalies. Is it really surprising there's anomalies in this perception of things? The materialist one. Anyway, we often resolve to act in some specified way at some future time, and then meet this commitment with great precision. The brain, recognizing in the sensed input a need for appropriate action, immediately begins to build a template for such an action. According to the ideas of William James, this template can be activated by an act of consent on our part, and later in time with the future commitment, when the future commitment is to be fulfilled. In the Liebert experiment, an initial instruction is given to the subject to willfully perform an action at some future time, say within the next few minutes, an act of raising a finger. In the Liebert case, the instruction is imprecise as regards the exact time for the call for action. Because of this latitude in the timing of the willful action, the physical brain will presumably construct a sequence of alternative templates for action, each designed to produce a specified action at a different alternative possible future, at a different alternative possible time. For the earlier template, the urgency is low and nature's reply will most likely be no. It doesn't really have to be done yet. In accordance with principles described in earlier chapters, all recorded traces of the earlier failed attempts will be banished from the realm of recorded possibilities. Finally, a yes response occurs, and that outcome is recorded. But all potentialities that do not lead to the outcome yes that actually occurs are eradicated by the earlier no collapse events. This leaves the record only of the flow of potentialities that do not lead to the template for action that is actually manifested. That leaves the record only of the flow of potentialities that do lead to template for action that is actually manifested. No record of the earlier potentialities that failed to manifest will survive the earlier collapses, and the still forming templates for now unneeded actions will probably dissolve. I somehow feel like I didn't fully talk about what I intended to talk about when I was talking about speciation and evolution and how that relates to timelines. So there's a pruning effect through superposition, no, through the process one, through that but choice of inverted commas, nature making choice based on your mental state or whatever, right? That's the pruning, but if there's a difference, if there's enough of a difference when some people correlate a certain timeline, some people correlate in another, then it will naturally spread out and naturally prune. So even a certain timeline will naturally adjust and move and morph over time. And this dynamic process of interweaving timelines would create an overall evolution of almost like a geography of the evolving consciousness streams of many souls. And this can evolve in certain situations, can create convergences or great divergences. Yeah, so that's what I want to say, I guess. The process in play here begin with automatic actions in the brain, which, responding to inputs from the surrounding physical world, that would be the immediate past, I would suppose, constructs appropriate templates for action. This process is accomplished essentially the same way that a classical physics-based neuroscience might suggest. Each such template, if held in place for a sufficiently long period, while all conflicting activities are annihilated, will send out a sequence of neural pulses that will, if nature's consent be given, produce a physical action. That is what templates for action do, if held long enough in place. Now keep in mind, nature's consent is us, the observer's source's consent, as well as, in a sense, all that is consent. And keep in mind, we are one with all that is as souls. There's not really a difference. It's going to be both or neither, I guess. Not always. Actually, not always. It'd be not always, because that's the difference between, maybe that's the difference between those who are in harmony with source, with all that is, or those who are in a sort of rebellion with that, which it's been called service to others or service to self. I'm not sure if those are the best ways to put it, but I don't know. For some reason, that's how Ra decided to refer to it. But, and there are material, but I don't know the reason. Anyway, so the observer's ego, surveying what is going on in the brain, selects on the basis of its values a template for action which has been constructed by the brain, and asks whether what the ego is experiencing is the perception which signifies the selected template has been actualized. A positive feedback will inform the ego that its choice of probing action has influenced its stream of consciousness experiences in the intended way. Only the yes responses are experienced or remembered. The brain records of the failed attempts are annihilated by the associated collapses. A mental experience associated with a no response can in general not be defined. But what if the answer yes to a question asked by an observer is in conflict with, wait, if it's in conflict with higher source, all that is desires, then it wouldn't happen. Which means that all that is does consent to negative actions occurring, say, you know, like genocide. I mean, that is a part of reality and it does learn from that. As for there is an aspect of working with harmony, in harmony with nature, or working in a sort of forcing it sort of way. That is a distinction that's real, but I'm not sure if, I don't think that can be dealt with. I don't think it's relevant here, or at least relevant enough. All right. So Liebig conclusion. The quantum mechanical understanding of the mind-brain dynamical system explained and defended in Schwartz 2005 and further elaborated in Stapp 2005-2006 accommodates and explains the ability of our conscious intentions to influence our physical behavior. This theory covers in a natural way the Liebig free will data. It reconciles Liebig's empirical findings with the capacity of our conscious intentions to influence our physical actions, without these intentions being themselves determined by the physically described aspects of the theory. This empowerment of the mental participation of the observer individual perceiver is achieved by exploiting a causal gap in the mathematically expressed laws of quantum dynamics. This causal gap is filled in actual scientific practice by invoking the conscious intentions of the human participants. A gap, I would add, that cannot be, it's a hole in theory if it's not filled by free will. So it just doesn't work if there's no free will involved. This practical and intuitively felt role of conscious intentions is elevated within the quantum ontology to a status of ontological reality, inherently and consistently integrated into quantum laws. The quantum experiment, the Liebig experiments are discussed further in the next chapter. Well, That was pretty interesting, but let's see, what's the time? Yeah, I'm not sure if I really have time for the next chapter. So I hope you found this interesting. I did, for sure. And well then, it's certainly making a pretty good case for idealism, I guess. And as ever, have a good day, or evening, whatever, and bye for now.